Welcome to the YouTube replay from Green Drinks December. We welcomed Raymond Leury, Mike Banks, and Mitchell House from the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa to talk all about electric vehicles. Enjoy this replay.
Welcome everybody, and as the pandemic continues, it's another great opportunity to gather on Zoom. Thanks for everybody. I know there's people coming from around Canada, so it's great to widen our audiences. For those who don't know me, I am Nick Hebb with SmartNet Alliance, and the Alliance is a group of businesses and organizations who collaborate on projects and initiatives to accelerate Canada's transition to a sustainable economy. So for more information on SNA, follow our website. I'm going to put that link in chat shortly. You'll be able to find more details about our members and recently launched business courses on the resource page, and also check out the membership page, which we will be updating and enhancing shortly in the new year. But right now you can find all our members, what they do, links over to what they do. In case you haven't heard, our longtime colleague Raymond has departed SNA, but thankfully she's still on the call and still going to be a part of the Green Drinks community. So want to wish a great future for Raymond, and thanks for being here. And she's going to go ahead and put her LinkedIn into chat there. So if you do want to connect with her beyond this, go ahead and follow her on LinkedIn there. So for those of you who are not familiar with Green Drinks, it's an international event. It's happening once a month in about 500 countries. I assume it's still rolling virtually. There are about 20 chapters in Ontario alone, and Ottawa and Toronto are kind of leading the way, but there's a lot of great little smaller chapters as well. We used to gather at the Fox and Feather, and right now we're 54, so that would have been pretty crowded in there. Definitely not possible yet, but it's great to gather on Zoom, and it's a great chance to connect with the community. So after tonight's presentation, we'll do a bit of a Q&A. We'll go through the different speakers' presentations. We'll do sort of light Q&A at the end of each presentation. And then at the end, I want to do a bit of an open general discussion about what is stopping the widespread adoption of electric vehicles in Canada. So if you have some ideas and thoughts, feel free to add them into chat. If you have questions for the panelists, go ahead and add them into chat as well, and we'll kind of quarterback through those as we go. So electric vehicles, we all know that we need to be driving them within the next 5-10 years. I'm happy to say I just did my first EV test drive a few weeks ago down at the Mobile Electric Vehicle Education Trailer that was put on by EVCO, Plug and Drive, and Enviro Center, and it was parked outside IKEA there. So I'll share a video recap, definitely worth taking a peek at my adventures over there. It was pretty fun to get behind an EV, and unfortunately they're not there anymore, but plans are to do more of these kind of pop-up shop EV test drives to come. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about energy evolution. I know there's a couple people from the city on. They're working hard. They've got a model that projects that the electrification of personal vehicles has the greatest potential to reduce greenhouse gases emissions in the community. So this is important stuff. The City of Ottawa does not have the regulatory tools to control electric vehicle availability, but it does have the ability to support a personal vehicle electrification strategy. So that's interesting. Some of the stuff they want to do is they want to have an EV only zone in downtown Ottawa by 2028. So if you can imagine it, only 7 years from now, you may have to have an electric vehicle to drive. The proposed boundary is Bronson Avenue to Catherine to Queen Elizabeth Drive over to the Ottawa River. So I know that'll be a great conversation starter later on during our discussion, but what do people think of that? So it's a bit interesting. And I'm happy to announce that SmartNet Alliance is working hand in hand with Energy Evolution to help realize these projects. There's 20 huge ones, and EVs are about 3 or 4 different pathways, so really important, and we're happy to be on board, and our members pushing this transition as well. So without further ado, I want to bring up some of our speakers. And Raymond Leury is retired from an information technology career. He's consulted for over 25 years, both private and public sector clients. And the last 18 years he spent working for Microsoft, culminating in the position of principal consultant. He's also attended Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, and he's presented to our crowd on that, so thanks so much, which reignited his passion, which is great. We're happy for that, in particular with the reduction of greenhouse gases. That led him to purchase an electric vehicle 7 years ago, so definitely ahead of the curve there, Raymond. Great job. And right now he's splitting his time between advocating for EVs, talking climate change, and volunteering with the Red Cross, and of course coming out to these Green Drinks events. So over to you, Raymond, to unmute and share your screen and get going on your first presentation. You're going to give a couple presentations tonight, so why don't you get rolling on your first one?
Great. So can you see the presentation?
Yeah, looks good. Thanks, Ray.
Great. Okay, so let's get going. So my name, as Nick said, is Raymond Leury, and I'm actually the president of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. And so we're gonna have a few different people from our team talking to you today. And this is the agenda we'd like to follow. So we want to talk a bit about EVCO, what we are, what we're doing. And then we want to talk about EV market share. Why do we want to talk about EV market share? Really, it's because we've been looking at market share and issues related to market share for some time now. And you'll see when I talk about it that we are expecting that finally the numbers, as you'll see with some of the numbers I'll show you, the numbers are starting to grow really fast. And so we're expecting that will lead to all sorts of opportunities for people in this group. Then we'll talk about the EV models that are available in Canada. Mike Banks will talk about those, and that will actually crystallize some of the points that I'll be making about the market share situation. Then we'll talk about, excuse me, I'll come back and talk about charging at home and on the road. So a brief primer on what the charging situation looks like, and we'll be happy to take some questions at the end on that. Then once we've done that, Mitchell House, who's another member of our board, will talk about EV incentives in Canada and around the world. So let's get going. So EVCO, Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. We've actually been around for almost 40 years, okay? So many of our members weren't born when EVCO was founded. So originally the intent of EVCO was to be an organization that would do conversions of existing vehicles to electric vehicles. So there was quite a bit of years where that was the main focus of the organization, and the organization was, I would say, much more technical and much more focused on, what kind of battery should I put in, what kind of motor, all these kind of very technical engineering things that that were of interest to people doing conversions. We're 100% volunteer, nonprofit. So we have no affiliation with or funding from the industry. And actually, one of the reasons I re-emphasize that is that at the last Transit Commission meeting, the chair sort of said that I was selling a product. Well, no, I wasn't selling a product. I was selling an idea that we need to get to electric buses as soon as possible to address greenhouse gas emissions at the city. So this is not about making money for us. This is about doing what's right for the planet. So we are subject matter experts on EVs of all types. So certainly a big background in passenger vehicles, but we're also developing quite a bit of expertise on transit buses, which Matt talked about, and I will talk about a bit in the next slide. Also some expertise in light, medium, and heavy duty trucks. We actually expect the heavy duty truck market in particular to take off very fast once we have more solutions in market. So really what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to promote the electrification of the transportation systems, and really mainly is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Also, we love to see reductions in particulate emissions and other things like that have an impact on health. But for us, the main thing is climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible to try to mitigate climate change. So the focus is really on that. So Matt already talked about it. We ran an e-bus campaign for about 2 years now, and Kathleen was one of the main contributors there. We worked with a bunch of partners, including the Healthy Transportation Coalition, I'm losing the name there, which Ecology Ottawa, and a few other groups at Carleton U, groups of students, and did a petition and all that, and actually tried to push as much as we could the idea that the city needs to get with the program and get to electric buses. So like someone said, I think it was Randy wrote earlier, Toronto has 60 electric buses on the roads right now, and actually Edmonton's got about 50. And if you look at other major cities across Canada, all of them are electrifying their fleet. Calgary is perhaps a bit of an exception, but Calgary, they want to do compressed natural gas because they're the oil and gas capital of Canada. Anyways, but everybody else is going towards electric buses. So we've been pushing for that. And like Matthew said, we just got the news this week that the OC Transport will be buying 4 electric buses that we expect will be on the road at the end of, around fall time next year. Okay. So any questions on that before we go on? No questions? Okay, I'm not looking at the chat right now, so is it?
I'll keep an eye on chat there, Ray. Yeah, maybe we'll go through your presentation and we'll just sort of see if there's any questions. Great. People, please feel free to throw them into chat if there are questions, and I can quarterback them over to Ray. Thanks so much.
Sure. Okay, so there's really no way to talk about market share without talking about battery costs and battery prices. One of the things, the biggest factor that's slowing down the adoption of EVs right now is the price of the vehicles, and the price of the vehicles is higher right now than conventional vehicles, exclusively because of the cost of the batteries. Okay, so but what we're seeing is a steep drop in the cost of batteries over the years. So if you look at, let me try to do the build here. Okay, so so this guy Tony Seba has really interesting presentations on YouTube. He was predicting in 2010 so in 2010 the cost of batteries was $1,000 per kilowatt hour, and he was predicting it would drop to $200 per kilowatt hour in 2020. And he made a whole bunch of predictions based on that as the cost of EVs would go down, adoption would go up, right? So that's an 80% reduction in the cost. If you look at 2019 numbers, the reality was that he underestimated the reduction in prices. So prices went down by 90% between 2010 and 2019. Which is driving, it's causing some of the things that were predicted to happen sooner than what we thought. If you look at the impact of that over the years, when I bought my car in 2013, the car's cost was about 50% batteries. Today, the same car would be somewhere around 15 to 20% of the cost of the car that would be the batteries. So that makes a big difference, because then the price of the car could go down, right? And we've seen that with models such as mine, where if I was to buy a new one, taking into account the exchange rate, I'd pay about 30% less than I paid when I originally bought it. So more generally speaking, there's been some analysts and economists who have been looking at the long-term price of cars. And what they're saying is, for a car that's got a 500-kilometer range that's not subsidized, okay, what we're seeing is for efficient fossil fuel cars, so, something like a, oh geez, I'm trying to think of the car there, Toyota. Anyways, small, compact, very efficient electric car. The cost goes up over time because of inflation and because of a bunch of other factors. What we are expecting to see, though, for electric cars, and let me try to get my screen to show. Okay, I've lost my cursor.
Curse of the split screen.
Sorry?
It's the curse of the dual screens.
Yeah. So there's the bill there. So what we're expecting is that mainstream battery electric cars with a range of 500 kilometers will follow a price curve that looks like this here. Okay, so, and that's what we're seeing in practice. We're seeing a bunch of cars showing up at lower price points, and we're expecting that to continue. And actually, if you look at the total cost of ownership, I would argue that there are already cars today that will cost you less over the lifetime of the vehicle than gas vehicles, but this just looks at the cost of the powertrain, okay? So what does that lead us to? Okay, so if you look at the typical technology adoption curve, this is what it looks like. Okay, so you get some innovators that buy the vehicles or buy the new technology, then you get the early adopters, etc. Then a successful technology, gets to 100% adoption at some point. Okay, what we're seeing, this is an example of color TVs in the US. Okay, and we're seeing that the portion of the curve, and this is very typical for most technology evolutions over actually centuries. But if you look at a lot of innovations that have come out over the last 100 years, you'll see this curve. And actually with newer innovations, the curve is quite more compressed. So we see with a rectangle there that the big growth in market share happens between about 10% and 80%. Okay, so one of the things I'll show you later is that we are at about that point where market share will start growing exponentially, and you see the price axis there. So that price axis sort of mirrors what we saw with battery prices, right? Price is not the only determinant, but price has a big impact because the cheaper things are compared to other solutions, the easier it is for people to transition, right? So, so if we look at our forecast, this is a conservative forecast we did. Okay, we actually have more aggressive forecasts. I'll just build this here. So we projected by the end of the decade. No, there won't be a man on Mars. Maybe there will be, but no. There'll be 100% or just about 100% market share for EVs in Canada. Okay. So if you look at real numbers of what we're seeing right now in the market, this is the latest data that we have for Canada. And if you look at this has the first and second quarters of 2020, and we see that the market share is 3.5% of battery electric plug-in vehicles. Okay, and if you look at the curve on the left, you see that the curve is starting to go exponential. 2018 and 2019 were a bit exceptional in terms of years for a number of reasons. The Model 3 was introduced in 2018, and the Ontario government eliminated the subsidy in 2018, and the federal government added a subsidy in 2019. So the numbers are a bit weird because of those external factors. But what we're seeing is a rapid increase in the numbers of vehicles. And if you want to see more about that, there's a tool that StatsCan has put together that you could go and look at. I've got a link at the bottom of the screen there, and it will show you all sorts of numbers, and you could go and pick the numbers you want to see. So in this case here, what I did is I have the battery electric vehicles in red, and in purple I have the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in purple, and you see the market share increasing considerably over the last few years. Okay, and this goes to 2019. 2020 is not there because the year is not complete, but you can see that last year 2.7% market share is where we were at. At the bottom left-hand side, you see that pickup trucks are very low in red. That's because there are no pickup trucks available in market currently in Canada. Okay, vans. Well, I believe the only thing that would be considered a van here is the Chrysler Pacifica PHEV, which sells but doesn't sell in humongous numbers. So you see that the SUV category is starting to inch up, and you see that the personal car category is inching up also. If you look at the data in more detail, and I drilled into the data, you can actually download CSV files with the data. So if you look at 2019, passenger cars only, okay, BC had a market share of close to 20%. So 1 in 5 electric vehicles, 1 in 5 passenger cars in BC that was sold in 2019 was electric or PHEV, okay. Quebec, a bit less, but still pretty strong, 13% almost. Ontario, 3%. Why? Well, part of the reason is incentives, right? So BC and Quebec have very strong incentives. So we're expecting that market share will continue to grow. Now, if we look at what's happening in Europe, just for a moment, This is a comparison, the first 3 quarters of 2019 in blue and the first 3 quarters of 2020 in green. Norway has always been the leader of adoption of EVs. They're actually closer to 80% now. But if you look at the other countries, Iceland almost tripled the market share. Sweden, same thing. And all of the countries on this list here have increased market share by 2.5 times or more. Okay, so huge increases in market share in Europe. Why? Well, I think that Mitchell will cover that a bit. There's some regulatory changes that happen in Europe that have been driving this. But bottom line is this is pushing manufacturers to build EVs and to deliver EVs so that they could meet this market demand, right? So we're seeing a booming demand in Europe, and I'm not going to cover the rest of the world, but we're seeing similar phenomenon elsewhere. So now to Mike, unless you want to let people ask a few questions.
Yeah, there are a few questions there, Ray. A few around the city buses things, so I can go through those.
Okay.
Grab that for you. So Tessa's wondering, where are the electric buses manufactured? Did we get Canadian buses? I know that was big on your list.
Well, no, actually that wasn't big on my list, but the buses are New Flyer. They're manufactured in Winnipeg. Okay, so they are manufactured in Canada.
Okay, great. What's the company name again?
New Flyer.
New Flyer. Okay, so
yeah,
it's the same company that makes the articulated buses we already have in the city.
Yeah, they've been around forever, and we've bought tons of buses from them.
Yeah, they're a well-known manufacturer.
Yeah.
That's great. And she just has a follow-up question. She says, "How about the U.S.?"
How about the U.S. in terms of buses? Or?
Yeah, I believe so. Whether we got any from there, or I'll maybe let her clarify in chat. We've got another. Sorry, that was from Susan, and she's wondering what percentage of the fleet in Toronto versus Ottawa will there be with these 4 buses that will be bought? In other words, how does Ottawa compare to Toronto in terms of electric bus adoption?
Well, we're way behind. So Toronto's got 60 buses. That are electric out of a fleet of about 2,800, I believe. So Ottawa will have 4 out of a fleet of somewhere around 800. So the numbers have fluctuated a bit because of the LRT adoption and all that, but we're somewhere around 800 buses in Ottawa.
Not good. So we all need to be getting on Manconi's case.
So we're laggards, but we're getting going, right? So
Susan's also wondering about the adoption in some of the U.S. cities. Are we seeing someone like Portland usually is leading the way, and California, obviously?
So we're seeing adoption of electric buses pretty well across the board. If you look at globally, to talk about that for a second, about half of the new transit buses delivered today are electric. Okay, so that's driven in large part by China, which is deploying lots of public transportation, and they have cities that have, Guangzhou's got 16,000 electric buses, and they're 100% electric, right? But if you look at some other cases, Los Angeles, which went to compressed natural gas about a decade or 2 ago for smog reasons, because compressed natural gas buses produce a lot less smog, they're now going to electric buses to reduce greenhouse gases, right? So there's many other projects that are happening throughout North America, throughout Europe. Okay.
That's great. And Pauline was wondering, are there discussions with the city about going electric with the fleets of cars, city trucks, police vehicles, ambulances? Yes. I know that's a big part of the energy evolution.
Yes. So there are some discussions there. We're really just starting there. And if you look at some of the cases, like police vehicles, for example, they're absolutely phenomenal cases to use electric cars because they have to have air conditioning or heating 12 months of the year. So there are the cases like ambulances that are really good cases. So we are working with others to open the eyes of the city's eyes to these opportunities. So we're hoping to see a big change in the next few years.
That's fabulous. Yeah.
If I can just add on to Raymond's thing about the e-buses in Ottawa. So I spoke with my own city councillor a few days ago over virtual chat, and Jean Cloutier. I live in Alta Vista, so Jean Cloutier is my counselor. And I was sort of emphasizing to him the urgency that we need to continue on with converting the fleet to electric buses. And what he suggested is that perhaps next year, if people push their own counselors, there's a good chance that next year will be the last year that the city buys electric or diesel buses. So if we can push our counselors, if everyone can do a little bit of activism and maybe write or call your city councilor and say, you know, I want 2021 to be the last year for diesel buses in the city, I think that is an achievable goal that we can now reach for, given that we have the pilot going on with the 4 electric buses now.
And to add to that also, if you look at the transpo fleet, the paratransport fleet, they're expecting to do renewal of the fleet in 1 or 2 years, I believe. I don't remember the exact date. So that's another 180 or so vehicles that could be electrified. And there again, you know, they're really good cases to be electrified.
Fabulous, you know, great conversation, and yeah, nice to see the advocacy working. I know we've got a question from Kathleen. Kathleen, I think I'm going to circle back on that one at the end, because that's really where we're going to sort of center our general discussion at the end of the presentation. So just hang tight and we'll circle back for your question. Thanks so much, Ray. We're going to come back to you for another presentation at the end. If you want to just stop share there, we'll get Mike's screen up, and want to bring in Mike Banks. And Mike has a degree in public affairs and policy management and currently works as a trade data analyst at StatsCan. Michael has owned an electric vehicle since 2017, which he uses as his daily commuter vehicle, and is in the process of retrofitting his house. So great job with clean technologies, great job, check mark on each. And he has a goal of making it net zero before 2030, so definitely ahead of the curve there. Mike is active in helping people transition to zero emission vehicles, having already converted most of his family and friends to plug-in vehicles, so great job. As a board member of EVCO, he also helps coordinate and participate in the various public outreach campaigns. So without further ado, we'll bring Mike in to share his screen and get rolling. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Nick. So yeah, as Nick said, I'm with EVCO. I'm one of the directors, and I'll be talking about electric vehicle models available in Canada now that Raymond has shown us that adoption is starting to spool up really quickly, and we'll be seeing a lot more of these cars around. So what is in the market? So what I'm going to talk about tonight is a brief history of EVs. I'm not going to go back 100 years or anything. It'll just be a quick, bring you up to speed on the state of the market. The role of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. These are not your old Prius hybrids. These are plug-in hybrids. It's a bit different. The current market as it is today, and what gaps still remain as far as electric vehicles on offer. And the federal rebate, I'll touch on that. I'll let Mitchell handle most of the discussion on that, but I do have to mention it a little bit. And the current challenges that are still around buying an EV and owning an EV. I'll also talk about what's coming up in the next year or two. And I'll point you to our EVCO buyer's guide. I put together a nice little spreadsheet to help people buy electric cars. I know that when I was in the market for my EV, there was no like one-stop shop to get comparison between all the vehicles, so I just made my own. So let's get started. So a brief history of modern EVs. The modern EV landscape really started about a decade ago, which is a surprise to a lot of people. I've found that, electric cars have been around for almost 10 years now. Back in those days, we had basically 2 main options. The 2 pivotal EVs that showed up in the market about a decade ago was the Tesla Roadster and the Nissan Leaf. And they were pivotal for 2 different reasons. The Tesla Roadster proved that EVs were not golf carts, that they could go fast, they could go far, and they could be fun. And that was crucial to kickstarting the adoption of electric cars in the world. The Nissan Leaf couldn't go that far, but it was pretty quick. It wasn't a golf cart, and it was, more importantly, affordable for mere mortals, mere peasants like me who couldn't afford a couple $100,000 sports car. There were other EVs in the market at the time. They were mostly compliance cars, and what a compliance car is a limited production, small availability. So they would be available only in California, for example. They were usually something that automakers created just to meet some sort of regulation requirement, and they didn't really want to sell them. They just had to sell them for regulatory reasons. So those existed, but they weren't ideal. A lot of people liked a few of them that came out, but they weren't the meat of the market. The meat of the market was Leaf and the Roadster. I ended up actually buying a used 2012 Nissan Leaf. So those exist, and it's great. It's what I used to drive to work when COVID's not a thing. Hybrids and plug-in hybrids. So now that you're caught up on this sort of the brief history of EVs, which one of these vehicles would you guess is the gas guzzling pollution mobile? Take a look at the 4 pictures on the screen, and which one do you think it is? If you're thinking it's the the Toyota Prius, you would be right. That is the gas guzzling car in these 4 pictures here. Toyota and Honda took an early lead in the eco car movement back at the turn of the century. If you might remember, I was in high school, and all the rage was the Prius, and Honda had the Insight that came out, and they were both kind of weird looking, and they were a way, like, people would buy them to be like, look, I'm eco-friendly. I bought a hybrid, and that was all the rage about 20 years ago. A lot has changed in the past 20 years. Legacy automakers have mostly used hybrids, the mild hybrids like the Prius, to fit larger engines into vehicles that would want them, but not necessarily to benefit the environment. They weren't designed to really save you money. They were more designed to get around regulations about having giant V8s in a car. So they would hybridize like big SUVs and luxury sedans and stuff. And that was more for emissions regulations than anything else. It's basically a form of greenwashing. And some of their advertising, especially from Toyota, is a little bit interesting about their self-charging. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, there is still a need for a hybrid type of vehicle. And so what I'm talking about are the plug-in hybrids. And what's different about a plug-in hybrid is that it usually has a larger battery than a normal hybrid that you would be used to with the Prius, but that you can actually plug them in and use them for the most part as an electric-only vehicle for usually around 50 to 100 kilometers, depending on the model you get. And these are important because even today, you still have to lug around a gas engine, which is not ideal. However, there are no fully electric minivans, and that's my minivan right there. It's the Pacifica made in Windsor. And there aren't any off-road capable fully electric vehicles yet, which is like the Wrangler that's coming out 4xe that's new to the market. So these vehicle categories I'll talk about a bit more later, but they're basically not covered yet by EVs. So plug-in hybrids are kind of a stepping stone on the way to electrification of vehicles. So they're the next best thing, basically. You may have heard that EVs are expensive and have short ranges, and I'm here to tell you that's not necessarily true anymore. There have been some major changes in the EV market, as Raymond has mentioned, and those once truths are no longer correct. Part of our mission at EVCO is to educate and inform the public about cleaner, greener transportation options and to help speed up the transition to a low emissions economy as quickly as we can. And to that end, prior to the pandemic, we were regularly holding several outreach events in real life, as you can see here in the pictures, where we would bring our own EVs, our own personal vehicles to these events and just interact with people and answer questions they might have about electric cars, because electric cars are still kind of new, and we want to demystify the whole concept of electric cars because they're actually a lot of fun, and we feel that they're better cars. Our public outreach has without a doubt helped convert would-be buyers to become actual EV owners. And we know that we've actually helped people buy an electric car because they came and saw one of our cars. And we think that's great. So currently there are 34 electric vehicle models on the market in Ontario. And these would be cars that you can actually run out and buy right now if you want, or cars that you can put down money for and will show up at some point in the near future. Prices range from $37,000 to $224,000. But I mean, they're coming down, right? So as Raymond said, they're still a little on the expensive side, but $37,000 is starting to get closer to the average new car sale price in Canada. Ranges, a lot of people are shocked to find that the shortest range new EV that you can buy is 177 kilometers. So you can drive to Kingston no problem now in a new EV. Before they were, 100 kilometers in my Leaf, sometimes less in the winter. But nowadays, a modern EV that you can go out and buy new, you're guaranteed at least 177 kilometers, if not better. Vehicle classes that are readily available are hatchbacks, sedans, crossovers, small SUVs, and large SUVs. So if you're in the market for any of those vehicles, there are electric options for you. Pickup trucks are arriving next year and are currently taking order money. So if you're in the market for a pickup, you have to wait a little bit, but they're coming. The most affordable EV on the market is the Volkswagen e-Golf. That's the $37,000 one, and it has about 200 kilometers of range. The best-selling EV, so that's on the one on the right. If you see at the top of the right there, that's an e-Golf. The one in the middle is the Model 3. That is the best-selling electric car right now, and it sells for $52,000 and has a 400-kilometer range. And then the most expensive one for current delivery, there are more expensive ones coming, but the most expensive current one, if you're in the market for a posh, amazing car, the Porsche Taycan Turbo, sells for $173,000, and it has a 300-kilometer range, which is pretty good. A lot of other popular models exist, so you don't have to buy a Tesla. A lot of our members own Teslas because, we feel like Teslas are really good, and they definitely know what they're doing with EVs. But there are other cars on the market, so we don't want to be like a Tesla fan club. So we're not sponsored by anybody, so we try and push as many options as we can to people and give people choice. And so some of those choices are from Hyundai and Kia. They have a very competent and capable selection of cars. There's the Kona, so the Ioniq is on the left there, the Kona's in the middle, and then the Soul is sort of towards the right. And those are all great cars. The Chevy Bolt is an excellent car. The Nissan Leaf is okay. And all of those cars that I just mentioned, except for the Tesla are, they all, except for the Porsche, sorry, they all qualify for a $5,000 federal rebate, which Mitchell will talk about in a little bit. And I will just give you a bit of more information right now. So the IZEV program, excuse me. So the Conservative government in Ontario canceled our very generous provincial rebate program. Prior to the Conservatives being elected, there was a $14,000 rebate for the purchase of a new plug-in car. And that was very generous, and it was very good. And I used that myself to buy the minivan, the plug-in Pacifica, but that's gone now. So that has not been replaced by the provincial government, but the federal government has now stepped in with a $5,000 rebate. The website that's on the screen now has a list of all the cars that qualify and how much they qualify for. Not all cars qualify for the full amount, but generally the battery electric ones do. If you live in the province of Quebec, so if you're across the river, there's also an additional $8,000 incentive available to you. I'm sure Mitchell will talk about that coming up. So we do have some remaining challenges if you're in the market for an EV. I don't want to, pull the wool over anybody's eyes and say, everything's amazing. It's really good, but it's not quite ideal yet. Availability is an issue. It's always been an issue, but it's less of an issue today than it was this time last year. Most non-Tesla dealerships don't often carry a full complement of the EVs that they're supposed to sell. And when they do, they're not charged, and there's always some issues there. But when I was compiling the most up-to-date information for the page I'll show you in a couple of minutes, I found that actually most of the dealers in Ottawa, at least, have EVs in stock on the lot. So if you're imminently looking at buying a car and one of the categories that you want is covered by an EV, you can definitely get into an EV in the coming days if you're up to it, if that's what you want to do. Legacy dealerships have typically been slow to come around to the electric future. A lot of that has to do with their business model, and they make a lot of money on maintenance and stuff. EVs don't require a lot of maintenance. They make a lot of money on like after service, like service and support, which you don't really need with an EV. So that's why Tesla didn't do the dealership route. That's a whole different story. But yeah, so some of the problems we encounter when we go to a dealership and you're looking for an EV is there's a bit of dealer indifference, and that's something that we try and work on as much as we can. So if you are in the market and you're thinking about buying like a Kona or something, be ready for that. The dealer that you speak to, the salesperson you speak to, may not be completely up to speed on EVs. So I would recommend doing research, coming to us, ask us questions, but make sure that you sort of arm yourself with a bit of independent research on your own because they're not going to try very hard to sell you an EV just yet. Their bread and butter is getting rid of the cars that they have on the lot. And so they have a huge incentive to dissuade you from ordering an EV or something like that when they have pickup trucks on the lot they want to get rid of. So just keep that in mind if you're shopping. But I mean, there are dealerships that are great with EVs, and I believe there's one in Gatineau that's fantastic. So it is a mixed bag, but be prepared to encounter some resistance if you're in the market for a new EV. And charging infrastructure, which Raymond's going to talk about next, is still a bit of a gap, but it's a lot better than it was last year, and it's getting better all the time. There's new chargers coming online basically every day now, and there's now coast-to-coast coverage for both Tesla and non-Tesla EVs. There's still some stuff that needs to be done. If you live in a condo or an apartment building, there's still some challenges if you don't have your own parking spot for plugging in. There's some issues en route, like some of the different some of the different charging providers may not have the slickest way of interfacing. So sometimes you have to download an app and it's buggy and stuff like that. But there are some good ones out there now as well. So just be prepared for a bit of challenges. It's not that bad. I mean, there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, but there is some truth to it to an extent. Right. And so coming soon. So I mentioned that there were some gaps in the EV portfolio that haven't quite been filled yet, and that plug-in hybrids do cover some of that. One of the big gaps are pickup trucks. Pickup trucks are the best-selling vehicle in North America, have been for years now. And there aren't any EV pickup trucks that you can buy tomorrow. However, they are coming in the next year. So what we have here are images of the pickup trucks that are probably hitting the market. The ones on the left are definitely coming soon, like next year. The ones on the two on the right, probably in the next couple of years, if they make it through startup hell. But the Rivian, which is the one on the far left, and the Tesla, which is the one sort of center left, are definitely coming. The factories are built or under construction. They've got the tooling. They've got everything they need. So those are coming in the next year. You can pre-order them, and you can have your pickup truck probably by the end of 2021. They're Ford, Dodge, Chevy, Lordstown, which is the one on the far right, and Atlas, which is the one center right. Those are all planning on coming to market in the next 4 years. Ford and Dodge definitely have EV plans. Ford's probably the most advanced in those plans. They've already shown off some videos of it pulling a train and things like that. So there will be more EV pickup trucks hitting the market very soon. But if you want to be an early adopter, then your Rivian and Tesla are basically your two options for the next 12 months or so. Minivans, we're still with the plug-in hybrid. Pacifica seems to be the only one for now. Volkswagen's coming out with one in the by 2025, they say. They're resurrecting the microbus, the Volkswagen bus, as an electric vehicle. FCA has teased something called a Portal, which looks like a Pacifica but electric. I'm hoping that comes out because I need a minivan. I have kids. Off-road vehicles, Chrysler's also teasing a Wrangler. Ford is alluding to a electric Bronco, so hopefully one of those two pans out. There's the Ford Transit van if you're a commercial client or you're looking at a fleet option and you have transit vans already, you're familiar with those. The Ford Electric Transit has just launched. It has 200 kilometer range. It's cost $57,000 Canadian, although the pricing hasn't been announced for Canadian, so I had to convert it from a US. But they are coming to the market. They plan on making these things available. They plan on pumping them out. Ford is going more in on electric than before. And there's no compromise on those vehicles. So there's no battery taking up, cargo space or anything like that. These are from the ground up, very competent electric vans, and they're probably going to be the only ones on the market for a little bit. If you're in the market for an expensive sports car, the Tesla Roadster is coming. So there aren't many electric sports cars because basically every electric car is a sports car in a sense. They all have incredible acceleration. They all have, very smooth and quiet driving characteristics and handle well. So the sports car term kind of loosely applies to everything now. But if you're in the market for a sports car, then the Tesla Roadster is coming out as well. So what I did is a little while ago, I made a EV buyer's guide, and it was something it was a spreadsheet I made for myself, just for fun, basically, to get an assay of what the market looks like. And I would post it on Facebook every once in a while, and people would love it and stuff like that. And then they would say, oh, well, this is wrong, and I need to update that. And so I'd have to redo it. So what I ended up doing is putting it into a Google spreadsheet, and then we're now hosting it on the EVCO website. So if you go to evco.ca, you'll see a button for buyer's guide, or the link is right there. And this is sort of an evergreen document that I update as I get new information. And I put the last updated up in the top right corner there, but basically, it's a list of all the electric vehicles available in Ottawa, how long you can expect for delivery, whether they're front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, an idea of what the range is, how fast they charge, the price, whether they qualify for the rebate or not. So we have the base MSRP, which is the first column, which is like the sticker price. But then what I did is I created a net price, which is sort of, it's not a real number. It's sort of close to what you would actually end up paying if you were to like go and buy one, plus or minus a little bit. Some of the dealers aren't quite forthcoming with exactly what little fees and conditions they have, but I did my best to sort of figure out, okay, what would you actually sort of walk out the store paying? And that includes the rebate. So when the rebate gets applied. So just to give you a sense of like what they compare to. I also threw in the average Canadian gasoline car sale price, just for good measure, just to sort of give you a sense of how these cars compete with the gasoline vehicles. EVs, as you can see just from the screenshot here, EVs are cheaper to run than gas cars, just in annual energy cost alone. And that's not even including the maintenance costs that gas cars require, like oil changes and stuff like that. So this is a handy guide I made. If you're in the market for an electric car, definitely go check it out. I try and keep it as up to date as I can. And when I get new pricing announced for a Canadian market or anything like that, I do add it to the sheet. There are some cars in there that won't be available for the next little while, but I mark that on the estimated delivery side where, you know, it's greater than 10 months is sort of like, you can pre-order it now, but you know, don't expect it in the next 10 months or so. So with that, I think I'm done my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, there were a few questions in chat there, Mike. So let me just grab those. We had Mark, and he was, we had Brent, and he's asking, could you speak about the impact on range when driven in a Canadian winter, i.e. cold impact on batteries and the need for interior heating? I know that usually you lose about 20-30% of your range, right?
It depends on the EV, actually. That's very vehicle specific. The newer cars do get a lot more range in the winter than the older ones do. The Leaf, my Leaf, the old Leaf, is probably the worst example. It's like a 50% hit, but my Leaf is a decade old now. So some of you may have heard that Tesla came out with the Model 3 update that has a heat pump. A heat pump is a huge deal for electric cars because that will cut the energy consumption in the winter dramatically. A lot of the new EVs coming to market have heat pumps, so you can expect a range hit in the winter, but the range hit is not nearly as dramatic as it once was. So yeah, I can't really put a number to it because it's different for every car, but you're probably looking in the neighborhood of 15, maybe 20% at the outside.
Yeah, and also just to add to that, the longer your trip, the less impact there is. So if you're doing a lot of short trips and the car gets cold between the trips, it has to reheat all the time.
Yeah.
So you'll get a much bigger hit. But if you're doing a longer drive, and I did an experiment going to Niagara Falls a couple of years ago, I got a hit of about 10 to 20% depending on the segment, and it was minus 18 outside. So that gives you a feel for how big the hit could be on long trips.
Yeah, I mean, so like the winter, we get asked a lot about winter operation of EVs because winter takes up, 2/3 of our year here in Ottawa. And it all has to do with how you manage your car. So what, like in my case, right, my cars live outside in my driveway. I don't park them in the garage or anything like that. I plug them in overnight because you can just get home, plug it in, walk away kind of thing. And I set up a charge timer in my car, so it doesn't charge as soon as I plug in. It charges sort of 1 in the morning or whatever when it was cheapest. And it also has a climate timer, right? And most EVs have these features where you can sort of tell it when you want it to charge and tell it when you want it to warm up. And so when we bought our Leaf, we were new to EVs. We had no idea what we were doing. We just sort of like bought one. It was used. I found it on Auto Trader. And I was, futzing around with it in the car in August. And I was like, oh, climate timer. Well, I have a regular schedule, right? So I know when I get in the car in the morning and leave for work every day. And so I set it up. So I'm like, oh, I want it to be like 20 degrees, at 8 a.m. when I leave for work or whatever. And I sort of set this up and then totally forgot I did that. And lo and behold, November comes around and it's the first day of like a hard frost we had, right? And I hear people outside of their, their pre-starts going and people are scraping and you can hear that scraping from inside the house. And I'm like, oh, I have to go outside. So I would like put on my, coat. I'm still in my pajamas and I'm like, oh, I have to go scrape the stupid car. And I get outside and my car's clean. And I was like, what? So I come back inside and my wife is like, what's wrong? Like, how come you're not scraping the car? And I'm like, it's done. She's like, what do you mean it's done? I'm like, well, I set the charge timer and I set the climate timer and I totally forgot I did that. But the car's all warmed up. I don't have to scrape it because it's like, it's defrosted and everything. And she's like, we live in the future. This is the best thing ever. How come nobody talks about this with electric cars? She's like, we never have to scrape again. This is fantastic. And so that was like the first sort of winter win we had with our electric car. The range does take a hit in the Leaf specifically because it doesn't have the thermal management that other cars do of the battery pack. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. It's a bit long-winded there, but
Thanks, Mike. No, definitely. There was Art had a question about incentives, but let's circle back for that with Mitchell because he's going to talk in depth on that one. And I know Raymond was talking a little bit about insurance, but I think she's got some answers there in chat. Okay. And I want to thank Alvin as well for sharing the link. And Mike, I shared your spreadsheet link as well. So once again, everybody hit the chat for all the links. Tons of stuff there. I also, earlier on, I shared a report from Clean Energy Canada. I've been following them quite a bit, and they've got a great report about the car conundrum. How, we're not manufacturing EVs and we're driving, probably the worst cars in the world right now. Canada's one of the worst. So yeah. Check out that report. It's definitely a good one to look at.
Yeah, and as far as emissions go, I mean, switching to EVs does definitely help in the emissions department. In Ontario and Quebec especially, our grids are essentially zero emissions. I mean, they're like 5% for Ontario, less for Quebec are natural gas. So everything else is 95% is emissions free. So when you do drive an EV, you are basically not burning oil anymore.
Exactly. So that's great. And Steve just shared a link, ev-database.org, and it has the real range of EV models for city versus highway and cold weather. So do check that out. Great resource. Thanks, Steve, for that. And thank you, Mike, for a great presentation. It got me excited to check out some more models and get behind the wheel of a few more of those. So we'll throw it over to Raymond for the last part of his presentation. If you want to just stop share on your screen there, Mike, and then Ray can share his. And then we've got one final speaker. Mitchell House is going to talk about incentives. I know there's a few questions about incentives, and we'll hit all the different provinces. So if we do have people in BC, Alberta, Nova Scotia, we can get you some information tonight. So over to Raymond for the last part of your presentation.
Okay, so I'll talk about charging at home and on the road. And sorry if this is a repeat for some of the people on the call, but essentially what I want to do is explain the full situation end to end. So home charging is, and this really applies to people who have access to a plug of some sort, right? So there are some situations with MRVs, which we'll talk about a bit later, where you don't have access to charging, which is a bit different. But if you have access to a plug, you could use what's referred to as level 1 charging, which is essentially 120 volt outlet that would go up to 12 amps. So 15 amp circuit, you're allowed to use 80%. 12 amp is what you'll get there. That gives you 6 to 9 kilometers per hour of charging. So when I say it's good enough for most driving, I actually know someone who's part of EVCO who's been driving electric for somewhere around 20 years. So he's had, prior to prior to the Leaf, he had some oddball electric vehicles and all that. And he's been driving for a long time, and he has 2 electric cars at home, and he uses only 120 volt, and that's enough for him. Okay, it really depends on how much you drive and other factors in your lifestyle, right? So so it could be good enough for what you're doing. Every EV comes with a level 1 mobile charging cable, similar to what you see in the picture there. So that one is from a Bolt, and you can see that one end is a 120 volt plug, and the other end is what you plug into the car, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Okay, so every car has at least that. Some have some fancier devices, but at least every car has that. So you could use that essentially anywhere where there's electricity. You could plug this, right? The most common plug available is a 120 volt plug. So if you go to someone's cottage, you know, and they're on the grid, or maybe they have solar or whatever, you could charge there, right? So anyways, so you could use it just about anywhere. One note is you should avoid using extension cords when you are using this type of device, because the extension cord could overheat. So you want to use a high gauge extension cord, and you want to use the shortest cord possible, okay? So again, home charging, there's something called level 2 charging, which is 240 volt. There are different chargers on the market that range from about 30 amp. There may be a few that are less than that actually, to 80 amp. They give you anywhere between somewhere around 30 to 90 kilometers per hour of charging. Okay, so 10 hours at 90 kilometers an hour, that's 900 kilometers of charging. So that'd be more than enough for all the vehicles out there, right? So usually you're getting about 40 kilometers per hour of charging. So again, 10 hours of charging overnight, that's 400 kilometers of range, plenty for the vast majority of situations. So there are 2 standards for level 2. One is a J1772, and that's used by everybody except Tesla, okay? So pretty straightforward. Tesla has their standard, and you'll see that it's also used for higher levels of charging, but they have their standard. Everybody else, in this case for level 2, uses J1772. The plug you see at the top, that's a J1772 plug. And what you see at the bottom is Tesla's come with this adapter that will allow you to use the J1772 to charge a Tesla, okay? So if you're asking me, well, what should I put as a charger at home? You know, I'm not sure if I'm going to have a Tesla or not. Well, if you put a J1772, you'll be able to use it on every EV that's available in North America, okay? So we recommend that you deploy one of these charging units if you are able to, for a couple of reasons. Actually, one that I didn't put out here is that it's a bit more efficient at 240 volts. So it requires less electricity overall to run your car. Also, it allows you to keep your mobile charging cable in the car, and it's always available in the car. So if for some reason you're going somewhere and you need to charge up, you have your cable with you as an option for you to charge, right? It also reduces the wear and tear on the mobile charging cable. So, you know, the mobile charging cables will wear out at some point and will probably need to be replaced, and they're not super cheap to replace. So by having a separate charging station, you separate the wear and tear between 2 units. So another question we get very often is, do you need to upgrade your panel or the service to the house because you've got an EV? My answer, as it says there, is most likely not, okay? A couple of things to be careful about. There was a change to the electrical code that now permits devices like what we have on the right-hand side here to be used in Ontario, okay? Those devices, so the one on top is the NeoCharge Smart Splitter. What it does is you plug it into an existing outlet, And there's different types of outlets that are supported with different models of this unit. And then on one side, you plug an appliance like a dryer, let's say, and on the other side, you plug your charger or charging station, really is, they're not really chargers. So you plug your charging station. What will happen is if the appliance is being used, the unit will shut off power to the charging station. So you'll use only one of the two at any point in time. Okay, so that allows you to take an existing outlet, no changes to your panel, and get charging set up at your house. Okay. The other device that's there is that's the DCC10, and I've got a link to if you want more information on it there. So that unit, what it does is it measures the amount of electricity being used by the house, and only allows the charger to use the power if there's spare power available to the house. Okay, so if your panel is 100 amp, for example, and you've got a 30 amp charger, and it detects that more than 70 amp is being drawn from the grid to your house, it will not let you use the charger. Okay, so so that prevents the breaker in the panel from going off. It also prevents you from you know, frying other stuff along the way. So these devices are now are part of the building code in Ontario, and these devices would prevent you from having to do any changes to your panel or to your service to the house. Okay, so there are options there, and electricians don't always understand the options, and so it's important to look out for yourself and make sure you're informed. Okay, so next, so MURBs, I just have one slide that talks about MURBs. So MURBs are multi-unit residential buildings. So here we're talking condos or rental buildings. And essentially the point I want to make here is that in that situation, an existing building could probably support a certain number of chargers without any modifications to anything. So just adding some 240 volt plugs or 120 perhaps for level 1 charging would do the trick and would be supported by the existing infrastructure in the building. If that's not enough, there are systems that exist. So EVSE is the EV supply equipment. So that's a charging station. Here we have 7 of them, and we have something at the top called the EVEMS. That's the management system. So what that does is it manages the chargers or charging stations in a way that it won't exceed, the charging stations won't exceed the capacity of the link to the grid going into the building, okay? So there are solutions that exist today that this typically is a lot less expensive than upping the service to the building, because just upping the service to the building is very, very expensive. This is comparatively a lot less expensive, okay? So just be aware that that exists. So when you're charging on the road, there are 2 options. So we talked about level 2 already. So that same level 2 that exists in people's garages is deployed in many locations. Typically hotels will offer level 2 charging, usually for free. Okay, so you pay the parking and then you're able to charge or something of that nature. So there are many, many hotels that offer level 2. There's other locations, but most of the other charging is level 3, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But the point is level 2 is a solution for you if you're doing a trip and you have a hotel stay that you're doing. Well, you could charge your car while you're sleeping, right? So that allows you to have a bit more flexibility. Now, one of the things that Mike alluded to is that EVs are great cars, right? I would argue that EVs are better than ICE or diesel cars in every single respect, with one exception. And that one exception is if you're doing a long trip and you need to charge along the way, you'll have to wait longer, okay? That being said, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to wait long, and I'll show you an example in a few slides. So what people refer to as level 3, or more appropriately, DCFC charging, so direct current fast charging. There are 3 standards in North America, okay? That's obviously a bad thing. So someone had a question about what can we do from a regulatory perspective to help the adoption of EVs. One of the things I would like to see is I would like to see the Canadian government to do the same thing as what Europe has done and mandate the use of CCS combo. Okay, that means that every charging station would be interchangeable with every other charging station with every car. That would make it a lot easier. The other thing I would like to see, which they've also implemented in Europe, is the ability with one account to access all of the charging networks that are available. So right now we have a bit of a hodgepodge of charging networks that are not that hard to access, but there are some issues with accessing them. So I said there's 3 standards in North America, and Tesla have their superchargers, which have the same connector as the level 2 charging, and that's their own standard, and that's what they support mainly. Okay, so the other 2 chargers or connectors that are out there are Shademo, which is actually being phased out. So it was mostly used by the Japanese and some Korean manufacturers, Nissan and Mitsubishi in particular. And now they're actually going away from that, probably in part because of what's happening in Europe. But also, if you look at the North American market, it's very easy to find CCS combo. It's a bit harder to find Shademo, okay? So as I said before, Shademo, it's not quite the same specs, but it's very similar, is a standard in Europe, okay? Okay, so essentially one of the things that, I didn't mention, when you go to the charging location, typically, if you're going to a non-Tesla charging location, typically you'll find one or perhaps a few Shademo adapters, and then you'll find more CCS combo adapters, okay? So most locations will have at least one of each, but usually there's more CCS combo adapters. Now this is from PlugShare, which is a site available on the internet. They also have an app, and just to give you an idea of how many chargers are available, this here, you could see by the check marks that I'm looking only for the Shademo and the CCS combos, okay? And this is Southern Ontario. If you were to zoom in, you would see more popping up. So you can see that there are quite a few. And if you were to look at the J1772, which are not on here, you would see probably 10 times more popping up. So it'd be covered with locations. So there are a lot of locations. You probably don't know about them because most of the locations don't do any advertising, don't have any big signs or anything of that nature. Why? It's because in the EV world, people find stations using apps. Okay, they don't find stations looking for signs of where the stations are located. Okay. Now for the Tesla situation, so here you can see that I've selected only the supercharger locations. That gives you an idea of what's available in Eastern Seaboard, okay? Lots and lots and lots of choices. And what's one of the things that's nice with the Tesla superchargers is every location will have multiple chargers. Some locations have up to 20 or more. But typically the minimum you'll see is well, there's a few out of the way areas where you'll see 4, but typically it's 6 or more that you'll see. So it's very, very rare that you have any problems finding charging with the Tesla. And you can see also that the map, that there are charging stations going up north of Lake Superior, and there's actually charging stations that go right through the country, okay? By the way, for the non-Tesla chargers, there's also some networks that go across the country, like Petro-Canada just lit up a network last year, earlier this year. I can't remember anymore. This COVID year has been too long.
Earlier this year, yeah.
Earlier this year, yeah. So they've got a whole bunch lit up, and there's other organizations like Canadian Tire that are doing the same thing, IV and a few others.
Electrify Canada.
Yeah, so we're seeing tons of chargers throughout the country. Okay. Now, I get a question very often: how long does it take to charge a vehicle? Okay, so this example here I just did today, and this is from my home here in Orleans, and this is the route that I would take going to Miami. So there's a site called abetterrouteplanner.com. They've got an app also that you could use. And you can see there that I put essentially I put the where I am right now, and then I put the destination, and I asked it to tell me what to do, right? So it actually gives me the road to follow, and it tells me where to stop and for how long I should stop. So this here example was built using the Kia Niro, which is one of the vehicles we had at the meet. And the Niro's got a range of about 400 kilometers, a bit shy of that. So it takes into consideration the vehicle, takes into consideration the climate conditions and all that. So this gives you a good idea of how much time it would take for you to charge at every location, where you could find a charger. Okay, so there are tools available. If you have a Tesla, it's a bit easier because the Tesla's got that built in. Okay. So essentially, that's what I had to say about charging. So do you want to take a few questions?
Yeah, there's a couple on EV adoptions that we'll just kind of hold off till the end, guys, because that's going to be our general discussion. Mark is wondering, are there any chargers at the 401 rest stops? Are they there yet? Those on routes?
There's signs. There's been signs for years. But I don't believe that any, or at least not most of those rest stops have chargers, right? But then again, what I would encourage you to do is to use an application like a Better Route Planner or PlugShare to determine where the charging stations are, right?
Neat. Thanks so much, Ray. That's a great presentation and nice to demystify the charging. And now people know when they're doing their cottage visits, they can bring their charger with them and charge up at their friends' cottages, right? So that's great. And all the snowbirds that'll be heading down, well, not this winter, but hopefully next winter down to Florida, they can get an EV and map their journey there. So that's great. Thanks so much. So we do have a few questions about EV adoption. Like I said, we'll do a general discussion at the end. I want to bring in Mitchell House now. And Mitchell, thanks so much for joining us. Mitchell was my tour guide on my first EV drive, which I've posted a link for the video recap. And I'll also post the links for our green updates too for anybody who jumped on the call a bit later. There's a few events next week, so hang around till the end of the call on that. But right now I want to bring in Mitchell. Mitchell, we already have had one question from Art about is there any hope for a federal rebate improvement in the next few months? So you can maybe factor that in on your presentation, but I know you're going to talk about all those great incentives that put money back in people's pockets. Take it away, Mitchell. You'll just have to unmute yourself there, Mitchell.
There was, sorry, the buttons all switched from the bottom to the top and I had to find them.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for joining us.
I was going to talk about incentives for a little bit, and I can definitely try to elaborate on some of the federal incentives or the potential upgrades to them. But my presentation will likely dive into those initially, and then I'll dive into some kind of along the lines of what Raymond was talking about, some of the other incentives or programs that could come out in the future that might spur the market for electric vehicles a little bit stronger than just monetary incentives. I think monetary incentives have their place, but in the future, more than just money will be the solution to how more people can get into an electric vehicle. So with that, I will get started with this. So just a summary, basically what I was going to start with was some of the early incentives that exist for electric vehicles, or that did exist for electric vehicles. I'll get into some of the current incentives that are available, and then I'll finish off with a little bit about why some of the incentives coming down the line were things that you should consider if you were looking to get a new vehicle in the coming years, and why you should make it an electric vehicle. So in terms of the early incentives, these are some of the incentives that began around the time of electric vehicle, some of the new generation of electric vehicles coming out, beginning with the Chevrolet Volt in 2010, and then onwards into 2018. So before the provincial election in 2018, that shifted it to be, or at least in Ontario anyways, less of a incentive-laden market. Many of the original incentives centered around things like tax credits, purchase grants, and exemptions from import taxes. So the US has had a $7,500, that's actually supposed to be $7,500, not $75,000 US tax credit, which basically, if you make I believe it's over $60,000 a year, as whoever you file your taxes, you are eligible for the full $7,500 tax credit that you can claim on your next year's, or on your taxes of the year that you purchased your vehicle. And that would reduce your tax burden by $7,500. Many people who purchase electric vehicles have the money for that, so therefore they can claim the full amount. And then in Canada right now, we have the $5,000 federal rebate for zero emission vehicle purchases. So that was something that Mike brought up in terms of what's available today. And that list of the vehicles that are eligible there being any vehicle, I believe, that starts, their base model starts at $45,000. And then their any vehicle that you purchase that starts at 45, but you purchase under the price of 55,000 with options. So Tesla qualifies for that with their standard range plus vehicle because they sell one that is priced at $44,990, but it doesn't have the range of the standard range plus, which is something that also qualifies because it falls under the $55,000 amount. So you can claim that $5,000 on the standard range plus model, but not necessarily on the long range version or the performance version. Basically, all the vehicles that are from mainstream manufacturers, such as the Nissan Leaf, the Mini Electric, the Hyundai Ioniq, the Hyundai Kona, the Kia Niro EV, and various other ones that you can see from Mike's slide, well, not slide, but the spreadsheet that he's presented. Those will all have the $5,000 credit applied, and you can see what they come out to with that $5,000 credit applied. And some of the more elaborate kind of rebate programs that exist are in Europe as well as in Asia. So in Hong Kong, actually, there was an incentive for completely eliminating the import tax on electric vehicles that were sold in that country, which is a significant portion of the, as it's stated here, every vehicle that's sold in Hong Kong, there's a 100% import tax applied to that vehicle. So whatever the purchase price of that vehicle is, there's a 100% tax applied to that vehicle, basically doubling the vehicle's price. But if you bought an EV, you would only have to pay the actual purchase price of the vehicle. So that became a very popular market for Tesla, where people were buying $100,000 Teslas and not having to pay import taxes on them. Whereas people who are buying small compact cars basically had to pay close to the same kind of money for a compact vehicle that ran on gasoline that you'd have to pay gasoline costs, with also exorbitant in Hong Kong. And therefore it was a very popular program. They since canceled that because they realized it was a expensive proposition, and also didn't necessarily benefit a whole lot of people except for those who are rich enough to buy vehicles in the first place. So those kinds of programs exist. And then also countries like Norway, which have been leaders in the space as well. They had similar import taxes applied there that are also exempt from EV, or exempt for EVs, and therefore, but not to the same kind of extent as the 100% tax that was in Hong Kong. In terms of in Canada as well, BC has not only the federal incentive, but an additional $3,000 that comes from the provincial government, and Quebec has an additional $8,000 that comes from their provincial government. So in total, you can get $13,000 off the purchase price of an electric vehicle that you purchased in Quebec, and $8,000 off the purchase price in BC, making a Tesla more economical as a purchase than most Ford Fusions or Camrys or Sonatas, and various other mid-sized sedans that you can purchase there. And then other things like the exemption from road, bridge, and tunnel tolls, those are prominent in Norway specifically, basically because there's lots of bridges in Norway, because Norway is built on a peninsula surrounded by ocean with commuters that travel out of the city into the cities of Oslo and Troberg and all those major ones there, and tunnels as well, because tunnels in a mountainous region are a thing. And that's more prominent in Europe, mostly because a lot of their road infrastructure is paid for infrastructure. So when you use that infrastructure, you pay for it. But if you have an EV, you don't. So if you're a commuter and you use those roads every day, the savings on that add up over time. When it comes to cities, many cities have offered EV owners access to bus lanes, free parking, and free charging. So if anybody has a monthly parking pass, you understand how that kind of adds up over time. And free charging basically just guarantees that you have a plentiful supply of energy in your vehicle. So that means you can sometimes bypass having a vehicle charging station at your home, which is not always possible in regions where it's very dense regions with multi-unit residential and off-street parking. So that's why those features are so popular for people in those countries. And then when we were discussing about car-free zones, you can, if in certain markets you have exemptions from congestion pricing as well. So congestion pricing basically works by saying we've created a zone where only these groups of vehicles can are being allowed into. Otherwise, you'll have to pay what is basically a congestion charge to come and visit that place, which in the UK currently stands about £15 a day. And I believe every year they get somewhere north of £1 billion in annual revenue from that congestion charge, which makes it, and all that money is then returned to help with vehicle incentives for EVs, as well as infrastructure for buses and bikes and pedestrians and things like that. But if you do need to drive into the city because you live so far out, an EV becomes a very attractive option for you if you have to visit into a congestion charge area every single day as well. So those kinds of early incentives began around 2010 and have only kind of expanded into the future as well. I'm going to go over a little bit about why these incentives have problems. And so generally it centers around the idea that the cost of the incentive isn't necessarily going to be more than the benefits they provide. So it's going to be more costly to implement a program than the benefits you'll receive in return. Many of the incentives are tied to saying the cost of carbon is a problem. But if you add up the savings from the carbon emissions you're producing, you'd have to do a lot of driving in order to make those incentives valuable to people. But that's not to say that the other emissions that come from combustion engine vehicles, such as nitrous oxides and particulates, those may also be able to provide, if you accounted for those emissions into your assessment, you might actually have the benefits coming out on top of the incentive. But the actual study of that isn't necessarily as concise as it could be. And therefore, without a clear data-proven study that shows that, the media argument centers around the incentives not necessarily benefiting the public in any major way. And there's multiple studies as well that show that throwing money at a problem is typically the most inefficient way to get people to shift their buying preferences. So sometimes it ends up being people who have the money to buy new vehicles, often have the money to purchase an EV without the incentive. And the average EV buyer made about twice the average income of the average income in various other jurisdictions. So it would show that you're subsidizing people who could have made the purchase without the incentive, rather than those who may be underprivileged or not have the income to make that switch. And therefore it's a redistribution of wealth to those who are more wealthy. And that also was probably one of the reasons why the Conservatives were successful in their recent election and becoming the Ontario leaders. And that was one of the first things they decided to do, was remove anything to do with that redistribution of wealth to favor electric vehicle incentives or anything to do with climate change initiatives. I was going to focus what I think on the current incentives, so some of the more mainstream incentives that exist around electric vehicles that I think make a bigger difference. And so the main one I'm going to talk about is the zero emission vehicle mandate, which has been implemented, I believe, in 14 different countries and various states, as well as British Columbia and Quebec. And that provides a framework to increase the availability and sales of EVs across different markets. And then the main stipulation is that EVs have to make up an increasingly large percentage of all vehicle sales, regardless of size, regardless of basically starting point of price, and try to sell as many, well, not sell as many of, but make profitable business decisions out of how many EVs you produce. So there are, the way it typically works are that credits are created for every EV sale, with companies unable to meet those requirements of credits paying penalties for not selling EVs in the first place. Those penalties increase year after year, making it more costly to not build electric vehicles, and the number of credits required by each manufacturer increases as well. With that, some advanced zero emission vehicle mandates also include the possibility of saving credits for future years. So if you start building electric vehicles sooner, you can bank those credits for future years, where you can then use them to reduce your burden, or reduce the amount of, where was I going with this? Basically, it makes it so that you can save those credits in the future. And the other way these work as well is you can trade them among manufacturers, which allows for a market to be created for those banked credits. So sometimes the credits in a particular year are worth less than they would be in a future year. So as the penalties become increasingly large, the costs for manufacturers not to comply with them becomes increasingly large as well. And so that's where the credit value actually increases, so then they can trade them at that time. And the general system for these zero emission vehicle mandates would show year after year, the percentage of electric vehicles that's sold increases about 3 to 5%, depending on which year you're looking at and which market. So the top one there is representing what Quebec's zero emission vehicle mandate tries to do, increasing the percentage of electric vehicles that need to be sold from around 10% in 2020 to 22% in 2025, and likely beyond that into the future years. And on the right-hand side here, you've got California's credit requirement, which shows the similar kind of increase in zero emission vehicles that need to be produced every year by various manufacturers in order to meet the requirements for that mandate. And then the way that zero emission vehicles address some of these problems, and some of the problems that were created in the past, was that between 2018 and 2019, the EV inventory available on dealer lots, so where you could actually go purchase one the same kind of way you would go and purchase any other gas vehicle, that inventory decreased by 25% from 2018 to 2019. And that was even despite of the availability of the $5,000 federal incentive. And then 31% of dealerships had a single zero emission vehicle in stock, and the majority of dealers quoted it a 3 to 6 month wait time to get an EV. So if people needed a vehicle today, they couldn't wait 3 to 6 months to get any electric vehicles. So they would end up instead choosing something that was on dealer lots today, making it more challenging to get people to consider an electric vehicle in the first place. And also, while Canada's vehicle production is ranked 12th in the world, it only represents about 0.4% of global EV production. So of all the electric vehicles made in the world, Canada only makes 0.4% of them. And the world doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of electric vehicles as it stands today compared to the global automaker market. So a zero emission vehicle mandate would therefore drive people to manufacture electric vehicles, and hopefully some of that would be developed here in Canada. And this final point here, I believe this is from last year, where there was about $300 billion earmarked for electric vehicle technologies for the next 5 years. So far, only $5 billion of that is being deployed in Canada. So this is a big market that's available that we could get Canadian manufacturing get involved with, to get more manufacturers to get into. And so if we wanted that to happen, a zero emission vehicle mandate across all of Canada could be one of those ways to get into that market.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. Really great to go deep on some of that stuff, for sure.
Yeah, just had the last slide here, which further backs up the zero emission vehicle stuff. Basically, the International Council on Clean Transportation, the leading figure, I believe, on clean transportation in general. Any market with 90% of the global, any jurisdiction that has a zero emission vehicle mandate, those represent about 90% of global EV sales. And then the Simon Fraser University Sustainable Transportation Action Research Team They quoted the zero emission vehicle mandate as the most effective, low cost, and transformative policy to transition to EVs. And I think the last one basically just sums up that in general. So I think I can leave it at that. And I think that should be fine. And I can answer any questions, or we can go into the discussion if you'd like to do that.
Thanks, Mitchell. Well, yeah, I really appreciate that presentation. Nice deep dive onto, looking at the rebates from a few different sides. We've had a lively discussion in chat as well. I want to thank everybody for participating in that. And there's room for everyone's opinion at Green Drink. So that's the great thing, is that everybody's welcome, and it's great to get the dialogue going and to hear where everybody's coming from. So thanks everybody for that. I have a few general questions that I kind of fell through the cracks. So why don't we kind of run through those? Maybe this is for Raymond. Susan was wondering earlier, can some of the diesel and gas buses be converted to electric?
Not economically. I'll answer for Raymond.
Sure.
He's still muted right now. I think he's busy in the chat.
Yeah, sorry. So there is an issue of the economics of it. There are some companies though that will convert a bus and the bus to electric. I think this might be a solution for OC Transport for once, let's say they want to electrify the last 50 diesel buses they've had, and these are buses that they've bought this year, let's say, right? And they're still good buses. There might be a case to be made to electrify them. But what we're proposing is that as OC Transpo, end of life their buses like they've been doing for decades, that they replace them with electric buses. That would seem to be the most cost-effective way of doing it at this point. Okay.
Great, thanks so much, Ray. So we've had a few people kind of jumping in, and this leads into a bit of a general discussion. People are wondering, what specific federal regulations do we need now to push EVs nationally? And I'll open it up to the whole panel. Ken's wondering, should we have interest-free loans from the federal government? When are they going to get serious about this? So, and as far as advertising and getting it out there. So what are some thoughts around what the federal government can be doing, guys?
That's a great question. If you don't mind, Raymond, I'll start with it. Free money is always helpful, but it's not necessarily required, right? I mean, like the $14,000 rebate in Ontario that we used to have was amazing, but also completely unrealistic and unsustainable, right? As EVs drop in price, the need for financial subsidies become less and less important. I mean, they always help, right? But they're not crucial for the adoption of EV. What we would really like to see are things like EV mandates, deadlines like the UK and other countries have set, where they say no more gas car sales after a set date, like 2025, 2030. There are multiple dates that countries and municipalities have set around the world where they say no more gas cars after this point. If we have things like EV zones, like emissions-free zones in cities like Toronto, if they were to set up an area, so if you want to enter this zone of Toronto, you have to have a plug-in vehicles, things like that are more effective incentives. Money's good, but the zero emission mandates where like Quebec has, where they say, and if you want to sell cars in our jurisdiction, you need to sell X number of emissions-free vehicles, would help greatly. That's probably the biggest one, because up until now, one of the biggest challenges with adoption isn't demand. The demand side is pretty healthy. People are keen on EVs. They're better cars. They cost less to run. They cost less to own. Acquisition costs are coming down. So the demand for the EVs exists in the public. That's not the issue. The issue is supply and making manufacturers deliver EVs to people. And up until now, there have been year-long wait lists. You would order a Kona last year and it would take you 9 months to deliver it, whereas you could just walk onto a Hyundai dealer lot and buy a Sorento or something, right? And so these are the challenges that need to be faced with some sort of regulations would help, and that would help a lot. I think Raymond, you would have probably something else to say.
Yeah, so this could be a very long discussion, but just a couple of things. So Alvin's asking about Quebec and what they've said. So Quebec actually announced that by 2035, they will not permit the sale of new non-zero emission vehicles in Quebec. Okay, so so that means that you won't be able, if you're a Quebec resident, you won't be able to buy a new car that's not either battery electric or hydrogen. But let's park the hydrogen for that's a whole other discussion. So and actually the UK has said that they will they're doing that by 2030.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things happening on, and there's other countries that have announced all sorts of other stuff, right? So, but if you look at the range of different measures that are available to the government, there are some like ZEV mandates which don't cost any budget from the government, right? Giving access to HOV lanes doesn't cost anything. Giving free access to, so in Quebec, if you have a Quebec green plate, it has to be a Quebec green plate. The ferries and toll highways are free for you, right? So that has a cost, not a huge cost, but it's got a cost, right? So there are a whole slew, and Mitchell touched on a whole whack of them, of incentives that are, you know, in some cases don't cost the government anything. In other cases, cost the government probably more than it's worth it, right? And there was a comment earlier about, well, why should we subsidize EVs when, you know, there's other pressing needs, and this comes out of my taxes and all that, right? So the reason why subsidies have been put in place is that it's very similar to the subsidies that were in place for green energy in Ontario, which actually ended up working because the intent of the subsidies was to kickstart an industry that was not yet profitable, but we could see, like with the price of batteries, we could see years ago that the price of photovoltaic cells and of windmills would drop over time. We could see that in the data, but we needed to get there. We needed to generate enough volume in the industry, and we wanted to generate that industry and those jobs in Ontario. So that's why there were large subsidies for solar and wind in Ontario. You know, so today the picture has changed completely. We don't need subsidies for solar and wind in Ontario. They're actually cheaper than anything else at this point. The same thing will happen with EVs. So EVs, like I was saying earlier, will be cheaper at initial purchase price than gas cars in a couple of years. And we're seeing that with some models. I would argue some are already there. So, and if you look at the total cost of ownership, which is what the fleets look at, so that's why I made a comment about heavy vehicles switching faster than we expect. Well, if you look at the numbers, and I just heard something today, back of the envelope calculation someone was doing, one Tesla semi transport truck would save about $25,000 per year. Okay, in operational costs. So $25,000 per year in an industry that already has razor thin margins is huge, right?
And that's per truck, right?
Per truck per year, yes. For a truck that only costs about $30,000 more than the diesel equivalent, right? So so the payback is less than 2 years, right? So, you know, as the prices of EVs go down, we won't need subsidies. That won't be an issue. But there are other things that we should be doing to make things easier. I talked about MURBs earlier. MURBs are an issue because we're having trouble getting condo boards to accept, to deliver charging solutions for their members, and same with rentals, right? The rentals, it's a bit of a difficult situation for the landlords in terms of how could they provide that service and how could they recoup the money that it costs them to do that, right?
That's great. Thanks so much.
I had one thing to add as well. If you were looking to buy a gasoline vehicle sometime before you wanted, like, if you were looking to get a gas vehicle, with the demand for electric vehicles being the way it is in the future, likely to be even greater than it currently is, it'll drive up the demand for electric vehicles on the used market, and your gas vehicle that you would likely or possibly want to trade in after 3 years, its value would decrease after that. And so if you're leasing your vehicles year after year, the resale value on your lease on the end of your lease will be less than that of an EV. And so it's just something to consider if you're looking to sell your vehicle back. It'll be worth less at the end of those 3 years than if you were to get into an EV.
And we're already seeing that today, right? Like
yeah,
with the Model 3 compared to the gas competitor, which was the BMW 3 Series, we're already seeing like Model 3s retain their value in the resale market, whereas 3 Series have fallen off a cliff, right? So we're already seeing that sort of phenomenon happen today in the existing market, and it's only just getting started.
Interesting, guys. Exactly. Great point. It's only just getting started, and we're happy to be part of that transition, as is the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa, SmartNet Alliance, all our members moving that ahead. We have to push towards the sustainable economy. There's no choice. I want to open up the lines now so if everybody can ask their own questions and do some follow-up. I know Randy had a couple questions, so I'll maybe put him at the front of the line. I just want to say a quick thank you to the guys at the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa for all your dedication, for all your hard work, along with SmartNet Alliance, hand in hand. You know, it's been great to have you down at the sustainability showcase, and you know, just working all year long to speed the adoption. So I'm going to put a pause on the recording here so we can kind of open up the lines, let everybody jump in with some follow-up questions. I've got Randy kind of first in line. Everybody else, if you want to raise your hand, and then you can unmute yourself, and we can kind of go around with some follow-up questions. Once again, thanks everybody. We'll put a pause on the YouTube replay here, and we'll open up for general discussion.